This is a CBS News special report. I'm Charlie Rose with Nora O'Donnell and Gail King in New York. A Supreme Court ruling announced minutes ago upholds a key portion of the Affordable Care Act in much of the country. The 6-3 ruling finds that the federal government's Obamacare exchange can offer subsidies to insurance buyers who qualify for lower rates. A different outcome would have made health insurance less affordable for millions of Americans in 34 states.
This decision does not affect Obamacare customers in the other 16 states and the District of Columbia. They have their own individual exchanges. Jan Crawford is outside the Supreme Court. I know you've got a copy of this morning's decision. Jan, good morning. This is a key decision by the Supreme Court.
Well, I mean, this was, I think, the most significant legal threat to the Obamacare law. I mean, going back even more so than the challenge that we got 3 years ago. And the justices, with the Chief Justice, joined by Justice Kennedy, also a conservative, joined with the 4 liberals to uphold this key portion of the law. So I think this means, with this significant legal threat cleared, the Affordable Care Act, the president's signature achievement, really will remain in place. As you said, about 6.5 million people were in jeopardy of losing their tax credits that made the Affordable Care Act insurance policies, made that affordable for them. So had the ruling gone the other way, which many people had feared, it could have meant the death knell for the president's signature achievement, the Affordable Care Act. But the justices now, and this is not a liberal conservative ruling, the justices have joined to say that the Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
Jan, since we have 6 affirming, and the majority are Chief Justice Roberts, Kennedy, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, what does that tell us?
Well, I think it says this was, you know, remember just 3 years ago that case was 5-4 and bitterly divided conservatives and liberals. Many conservatives thought Roberts had betrayed them by joining the conservatives. So now we have Justice Kennedy also going over. And this was actually, I think, a more difficult case because the law, the way this massive 2,000-page law was written, did have one section that suggested those tax credits were going to be very limited to only the people in states that set up their own exchanges. But the court in this ruling rejected that and said, in the words of Chief Justice John Roberts, we are going to give Congress, you know, its due. I mean, it intended for the Affordable Care Act to protect and give insurance coverage to all Americans. So we are going to interpret that law consistent with what we believe was Congress's understanding. So this is not going to be that kind of divided, bitterly divided outcome that we saw 3 years ago.
Jan, what is the significance of the fact that the Chief Justice wrote the majority opinion?
Well, I think he's owning this. You know, I mean, he wrote that opinion 3 years ago, like I said, and really conservatives felt deeply betrayed. And again, as the Chief Justice of this court, he's making a statement that this law is going to be interpreted the way they believe that Congress intended. So he is, you know, he is saying, I was there 3 years ago, I'm there today, and I'm not backing down from that.
So is this ruling a surprise, Jan? And what are the comments from the justices that did not vote for it?
Well, I think that this, in many ways, is what most people had expected. Although with this Supreme Court, as you guys know, you can never be sure because many people certainly didn't expect Roberts to cast that key vote 3 years ago. But the dissenters, Justice Scalia, writing the main dissent, joined by Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, said, you know, the law says what it says, and we have to hold Congress to its word. And Congress has to be able to, when Congress writes something and the law says it, we have to be able to interpret that. And so, you know, if the IRS or whoever interprets that a different way, we still have to go on what Congress said. So they are also very strong in saying that is absurd what the court has done today. And its 21 pages of explanation make it no less so.
Yeah, the case brought by the plaintiffs from Virginia sort of hung on 4 words in the Affordable Care Act, established by the state.
That's right, and so that would mean, and the opponents had argued, that those tax credits will only be available to people who got their insurance through exchanges established by the state. The problem is 34 states decided we're not going to set up our own independent exchanges. We're just going to rely on healthcare.gov, you know, that fabulous website, for their residents. So 34 states, the residents in 34 states, were getting insurance through healthcare.gov. And the opponents said, look, the law says they shouldn't get tax credits because the law says it's only for people who are getting it in those exchanges established by the state. But the court said, look, no, that's not what Congress intended. So it said that the IRS, which is implementing this law, that its belief, its regulations, that those credits were available to everyone across the country. The court is saying that the IRS's interpretation is right.
So, Jan, in the past couple of years, we have had 3 years, we've had two Supreme Court decisions essentially upholding President Obama's signature domestic policy achievement. There are still many people that bitterly oppose this law. Does this mean that the only avenue to change the law would be through Congress?
Nora, I think we can pretty much say that because this was the most significant remaining legal threat to the law. And if you look at polls, it's still the American people are still deeply divided over this law, but they're moving in the direction of supporting it. And I think it would be very difficult now, and certainly with the president in the White House ready to veto anything, to change this law legislatively.
And Jan, can we talk about the White House for a second? I realize the ruling has just come in, but had you heard anything from them about how they were feeling about what was going to happen today?
Gail, this decision, and obviously we've got one more remaining landmark decision on same-sex marriage, but in Washington, this decision had the entire town sitting on the edge of their seats. In Congress, people were trying to decide what will we do if the Supreme Court rules against the Obama administration. Republicans, were they going to have to come up with a new law? Would they try to extend the subsidies? What would this mean for the presidential candidates? I can assure you that the Republican presidential candidates are probably the most relieved by today's ruling because now they will be able to continue to rail against the Obamacare health law
thank you so much.
6.5 million people losing. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Our coverage will continue throughout the day on this CBS station and on our 24-hour digital network, CBSN. Watch it at cbsnews.com/live. Many of you will return now to CBS This Morning. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Charlie Rose with Norah O'Donnell and Gayle King, CBS News, New York.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.